Wednesday afternoon. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I am your host of Border Report Live here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. Got a great program for you today. Our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez, is not only going to fill us in on some very interesting cartel activity happening across the border, but he's also got a very special guest, Fernando Garcia, founder and executive director of Border Network for Human Rights, will be joining us a little later in the program, so you're definitely going to want to stick around for that. But first, let's take a look at some of the things making headlines across the border, starting with in Los Angeles. A 15-year-old boy with disabilities was detained outside a local high school by federal agents this week in a case of what they're saying is mistaken identity. Now, here's a look at the video. Education leaders are now kind of afraid that many families are going to keep their kids out of school over fear of immigration raids. Now, we talked a little bit about this yesterday, and we actually heard Mayor Karen Bass talk about these incidents. Now, this incident happened yesterday morning, or rather Monday morning, just days before more than 500,000 Los Angeles United School District students returned to the classroom. Now, according to the superintendent, the student had gone to a neighboring school with his grandma to accompany a relative registering for classes. The boy, who was scared, was removed from the car and placed in handcuffs, though after school staff and the Los Angeles Police Department intervened, and he was later released. Now, Department of Homeland Security said that they were in the area to detain a Salvadoran national with ties to the violent MS-13 gang, and that, quote, allegations that Border Patrol targeted the high school are false. Also happening, you may remember we told you earlier this month that Border Patrol agents all along the U.S.-Mexico border only apprehended about 4,600 migrants trying to make their way into the country. Now, statistically, that is an 80% decrease from last year. In July, agents detained 4,600 immigrants. In July of last year, that number was 56,400. That's almost 52,000 more people were detained in the same period last year. The largest number of detentions, and you can see them right there on your screen, that dark green area. It's kind of dark greenish in the Rio Grande Valley down here where we are, but up where our El Paso correspondent Julian Resendez is, nearly 1,100 migrants were apprehended. And I think Julian's going to join us right now because Julian, you've been tracking that. What's going on over on your side of the area?
Rudy, good to be back with you today. Yes, illegal immigration encounters are way down all across the border because of the stepped up patrolling and all the other measures, including the restrictions on asylum, which have been widely discussed in this show. Now, that being said, here in El Paso, almost 1 in 4 of all the migrants being apprehended on the border are being apprehended here in El Paso. And I've been speaking on the record and off the record with various officials locally and regionally. And we kind of have a good picture of why that is. Number one, it has to do with the population. Um, we have one of the largest concentrations of population in the entire border. El Paso County is around 860,000 people. Juarez, Mexico is closing in on 2 million. And we have several communities in outlying areas. So the more people there are, the higher the likelihood that somebody is going to want to be brought over to the U.S. The other, and we do have a clip to illustrate this, is that migration is not, it is self-propelled. But once you get to the border, the cartels take over, the criminal groups take over. We have learned, we have come into possession of several videos that are being distributed throughout southern Mexico, they're being posted there by gangs, by criminal organizations, trying to recruit people from Mexico to come over to the United States. They show like we're trying to show in this clip, people walking through the desert, being led by a guy in a ski mask. They also show videos of people already in either the El Paso or the Albuquerque area giving testimonials as, quote, satisfied clients and referring friends and public in general to contact X, Y, or Z smuggler so they can also be successfully brought over. So that's pretty much what is going on. We're seeing decrease migration throughout the border because of things that we have discussed in the past. But we're also seeing the cartels still trying to recruit and still bringing people over this very highly populated area of the border.
Now, I don't know if any of off the record or on the record individuals talked to you about this, but I just had one question about this. You know, the last couple of weeks we've been talking about the decreasing and migrant apprehensions, which means less people are crossing the border in between the port of entries, which means that less people are paying cartels for this service, which means they're trying to increase their revenue through other methods, whether it be the increase of drug trafficking or whatever it may be. We've talked about a lot of stuff. We've talked about oil production too, as well, and you know, the question I have is, I guess with these ads now, have you heard any rumblings of them like charging more than the exorbitant fees that they were already charging folks to get over the border?
Definitely, we have seen an increase in the fees being charged to everybody coming to the border. Obviously, there are different scales. If you're from Mexico, for instance, you're likely not going to pay as much as somebody coming from India or China or Africa. If you're from Guatemala, likewise, you're not going to pay the same as somebody being brought over from Brazil, Colombia, or somewhere else in South America. Definitely. But yeah, one thing has to do with the other. Decreased migration, higher smuggling prices, and now over recruiting by the cartels in southern Mexico.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your reporting on that, Julian. We really appreciate getting all that information from your little slice of the border. But you also are going to continue on now. We are now going to bring in our very special guest today that you're going to be speaking with, and that is Mr. Fernando Garcia, founder and executive director of the Border Network for Human Rights. Thank you so much for joining us today, sir.
Hi, yes, thank you for inviting me.
Yeah, Rudy, the reason that we decided to invite Mr. Garcia today is because his organization, which has been around in El Paso for a long time, which started as an advocate for civil rights as well as migrant rights, has been running a campaign. And this has to do with something that they noticed when they came into being, and was probably, Fernando, one of the reasons that the group came into being. Just seeing what was going on, the interaction between federal, especially federal agencies, but also local authorities with our migrant population and also with our Hispanic population. So I'm going to toss to you now as far as what you have been doing since the year 2000 in terms of trying to document this interaction. Please go ahead.
Yes, Juliana. Yes, one of the main campaigns of the organization, probably is the oldest campaign of the organization. It is the abuse documentation campaign. What that means is uh, that we needed to have a metric and a way to know what was the impact of law enforcement in our border region, especially violating civil and constitutional rights. We knew that things were happening back then in the year of 2000. We knew that there were like a lot of enforcement activity. People would actually complain very informally about some of these human rights and civil rights violations. So we decided to launch a new kind of abuse documentation campaign that would involve hundreds of members of our community has the abuse documenters. So we had trained abuse documenters in our community in West Texas, in Southern New Mexico. We expanded it into Texas already. We can talk about that, but that's been a campaign that we had launched every year to actually understand what is the status of human rights violations, what relates to specifically immigration enforcement at the border.
Fernando, and what is it that the documenters are looking for? Are they looking for racial profiling? Are they looking for specific acts as opposed to maybe somebody's opinion about law enforcement?
Yes, yes. Let's clarify that we are not uh, doing a survey. The abuse documentation campaign is not asking people whether they feel abused or not, and the answer is not is yes or not. This is more complex than that. I mean, an abuse documenter goes into the community and interview people, and it takes time to do that. So what we're trying to understand is if there's been violations of constitutional rights. And when I say, for example, constitutional rights, is there been violations of the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, the Fifth Amendment? So people feel that law enforcement has entered in their homes or their property with the proper search warrant or not, or with their permission, or if people is being somehow targeted because of the way they look or the way they dress, which is racial profiling. Sometimes also we actually documented verbal and physical abuse by law enforcement in the interaction with these members of the community. So there's an array of issues that we're trying to look, but this is not only a survey, we're trying to understand the testimonies of community members in a region to actually understand if there's any pattern of abuse committed by any of these agencies at the border.
Yeah, I was struck with your presentation yesterday when you announced the program for this year. How you said that you're kind of taking a page from journalists, let's say, in asking specifically who did what to you when. How was this done?
Yes, and for us to actually get a ballot of or truthful case, we go through a very in-depth conversation with people, in this case with the potential victims. It's not only to ask them about hearsay or just a loose narrative. We go and ask them that formula that works for any professional reporting. In this case, who did what to whom, where, and how. So that's very specific for us. I mean, we go into the case and we're trying to understand who was the agency or the agents or officers that were abused, or the perpetrators. Also, where this happened, when that happened, what were there were any witnesses, what kind of language and what was the interaction between the victims and the perpetrators. So we will go into a deep conversation that usually lasts half an hour, 45 minutes for one testimonial documentation.
Two more questions,
Actually,
Fernando.
sorry, Julian.
Go
Let
ahead.
me stop you just real quick. We need to take a quick break, but stay with us, Mr. Garcia. A couple more questions, as you heard Julian say. We're speaking with Fernando Garcia, founder and executive director of the Border Network for Human Rights. Stay with us. Border Report Live is back in 1 minute. And welcome back to this Wednesday edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and if you haven't done so already, go ahead and check us out. We are every day. This episode will play later on Apple Podcasts, the iHeartRadio app, as well as Spotify. So if you haven't done it yet, go ahead and check us out. Follow us, Border Report Live, on all those podcast platforms. Now, I wanted to bring back in Mr. Fernando Garcia, founder and executive director of the Border Network for Human Rights, who's speaking with our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez.
Couple more questions. I know that the survey, the documentation campaign barely started starting up, but in years past, what are some of the things that your documenters have found, and what has been done with that information?
Well, it changes every year. I mean, there's several patterns being identified every year, but in several of them, actually, we had identified, for example, high-speed chases by the state police in the region, or the use of physical force, shootings, illegal shootings, the use of lethal force. We have also identified the illegal entries into homes and property. That means with no permission, no search warrant, no legal warrant, racial profiling, physical abuse, and verbal abuse, especially at the ports of entry. We actually heard a lot about verbal abuse against people crossing the port of entry, both people with visas or U.S. citizens also being subjected to some of these alleged abuses.
All right, and what is done with that information? And when you present this information to law enforcement, has there been a response? Has there been change?
One of the main purposes of the campaign, it is to go to the agencies, to the law enforcement institutions, and tell them that there's a problem, that there's a perception in our community about their actions and their activities within our communities. So we do give the chance to the law enforcement institutions to review the report even before we make it public. So for them to understand some of the alleged abuses and mistreatment violations have done by their agents or officers. So we go to them with the idea that there's going to be a very positive action by these agencies to change any problematic practice. So I think we do that. And also we make that public. I mean, we usually talk about which agency was committing any major pattern of human rights violations.
Mr. Garcia, I'm sorry to interrupt, Julian. I did have a
Yeah.
couple questions myself as well. Are there like levels of severity? I know you said it's very complex, but is there any kind of like key, for example, to say, okay, this falls under a level 5, or this is just verbal, so it's under a level 2? Do you have anything like that?
We take all of them seriously, but I think based on each of the cases, there's a level of response. Like, for example, some cases, some violations, the victim just want to actually tell the story. I mean, they just want to people to know, and sometimes they want to file an internal complaint process. For example, if there's a verbal abuse, they feel that the dignity was violated, so they want to say something, and they want the agency to know. In other cases where you have shootings, and at some point we have alleged rape by some border agents, that takes you to some different level. That's maybe a legal case. You take it to the court. Maybe that is a whole lawsuit. I mean, it depends on what the victim also wants to do. I think what we do is to try to find those cases and bring it up publicly for the public discussion.
How often do you find yourself coming across those incredibly severe cases, like the one you just mentioned of potential rape happening?
Every year there's some major incident, or sometimes become more complex because it's not only one or two or three. Like, for example, a couple of years ago, we saw migrants dying in uh, chases, in high speed chases by DPS in El Paso region. There was not just one case, but several cases, and that was a very high profile case. So we made it public, but also families wanted to do something. So that's an example of it. In other cases, we had uh, found, for example, the uh, the use of firearms were not used legally. In this case, shooting at people at the border. So in those cases, we take it to the next level. So there's others. I mean, you're crossing the bridge, and they tell you something that is inappropriate. So people actually still want to say something, but you don't get it to the courthouse necessarily.
How often do you get folks that just want to be heard, want to tell someone their story, and it may be an incident that rises to the potential of a legal case, but they say they don't want to pursue it? Does that often happen? And if it does it happen because they're afraid, or what might it be?
There is some cases where actually most of the cases, whatever we do with them, we always ask the victim what to do with the case. I mean, sometimes they just want to tell the story, especially because they don't want this to happen again to them or to other people. I think that's kind of the basic premise. But so there's some specific cases in the past where they didn't want to go beyond because I think they had done enough. They already spoke. They want just to file an internal complaint process, for example.
And
Rudy,
yes, sir.
something very important. Yeah, something very important. Every year, when the organization presents the results, I try to get the other side from Border Patrol, from CBP, etc. And what they tell me is, all right, fine. We want these people, these individuals who have a complaint, to come and file a complaint with us, which can be difficult because, in theory, it's the offending agency. You want to go and complain with the people that allegedly abuse you. But they do have independent organizations within their agencies, like the Office of the Inspector General, like the Office of Professional Responsibility. And in my web story, I did share some of those contacts for people to go directly to them. Also, I wanted to ask Fernando. The campaign has started; it's about to start. Where can people go and tell their stories?
Yeah, just let me just mention something about this. I mean, it's true that there's internal processes. Border Patrol, ICE, and other, they have the internal complaint process. The fact is, a lot of people in our community, not only immigrants or refugees, but U.S. citizens and residents, they don't trust that process because it doesn't provide results. In the past, we had tried it several times, and nothing has come up out of it. So I think that is also a call to action to actually reform that internal process because we want people to go directly to Border Patrol and ICE and the local police to do the complaint as is the civic duty, right? But it doesn't happen. There's a lot of fear within the community, like to go to the agency that abuse you and to go back to them, and it doesn't feel fine for some people. We are having this abuse documentation campaign in 2025 is having multiple locations. You can see it in our webpage. We're going to post them there, but we're going to be doing abuse documentation, and we're going to have stations in Albuquerque and the surrounding areas in northern New Mexico, in southern New Mexico and Las Cruces, West Texas and El Paso, Presidio, Eagle Pass, and Del Rio. So that is the initial scope of the campaign, mostly along the border. Also, we're going to have some partnership with people in Austin and Houston because they want to implement this campaign there.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time, Mr. Garcia. We've been speaking with Mr. Fernando Garcia, the founder and executive director of Border Network for Human Rights, about the campaign to document these immigration authority abuses. And thank you so much, Julian, for bringing on this great guest for us. We appreciate it. That's our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez, over to my right there. Stay with us. We're going to go over a couple more headlines when we return here on Border Report Live. We're back in 1 minute. And welcome back to this Wednesday edition of Border Report Live. My name is Rudy Mireles, and I'm your host here in Harlingen, Texas, in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. Very enlightening conversation that we just had with our El Paso correspondent, Julian Resendez, and Mr. Fernando Garcia, the founder and executive director of Border Network for Human Rights. If you're just joining us, we are in podcast form now, and you can, if you missed today's episode, you can get the latest episode every day, 5 p.m. We put it out, and you can get Border Report Live podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, as well as the iHeartRadio app. So make sure, if you don't have time to watch, you can always get a listen in too, but you definitely want to watch. We always have some good video like this video that we are about to show you. As in Hudson, Colorado, some residents are pretty upset there as the government plans to open a new ICE detention center in an empty prison. Now, the facility had been closed for years, and now Immigrations and Customs Enforcement hopes to convert this prison into the newest detention center by the end of this year. So they only have about 4 months to get it done. Some residents say it is needed to keep migrant criminals detained, while others say they never thought their small town would become home to hold immigrants. Now, the prison is 30 miles northeast of Denver. Last night, officials in the rural Tennessee town of Mason voted to turn a converted prison in that community into an immigration detention facility run by a private company. ICE is opening detention facilities at several places, and we've told you about several of them. We've had Julian reporting from El Paso at Fort Bliss as they get ready to open that center, and we actually heard from Senator John Cornyn, who visited that center earlier that week. Again, you can watch that episode on borderreport.com, or you can listen to it on the podcast to hear what he had to say regarding that facility. We've also told you about the Florida Everglades facility that the government is calling the Alligator Alcatraz, and how Camp Atterbury in Indiana is also turning into a Department of Homeland Security facility as well. Up in the Pacific Northwest of the country, in Seattle specifically, county commissioners there have set up cameras at the King County International Airport to show the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement flights that are taking place once or twice each week there. Now, the county set up 2 cameras to view the loading and unloading of immigrants as what they are calling a public service. Now, it's very different from what you see at most of these ICE locations. I can tell you from experience here, we often see these types of flights leaving out of Harlingen under the cover of darkness, either really late at night or really early in the morning. So this is pretty different. The immigrants are coming to or leaving the Northwest ICE Processing Center, which is a detention facility in Tacoma, Washington. Most flights from Seattle are transfers to other airports where the migrants will make connections to overseas flights. And really quick, before we take off for the day, we wanted to remind you to check out our partners at Political Power Ranker. Now, if you don't know what that is, Political Power Ranker is a weekly show tracking the movers, shakers, and rule makers in American politics. Nextstar's director of political content, Chris Berg, and director of Emerson College polling, Spencer Kimball, break down who's up and who's down in the world of politics based on my favorite thing ever, data. Now, this week's show, or this past episode rather, focused on focused on new polling from Emerson College on the California governor's race, the issue of redistricting, and a new 2028 presidential poll of California residents. So if you've been watching the news at all, and if you've been watching anything that's happening across the country, you know how important that California governor's race is, how important that issue of redistricting is, because it's now affecting their state as well as Texas, and how important it is to see if that presidential hopeful, or rather a governor turned presidential hopeful, is getting the support of his residents. So make sure to check that out. You can find more on Political Power Ranker at abcs27.com or your local Nexstar station's website. That's going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us on Border Report Live from Harlingen, Texas. My name is Rudy Mireles. Have a great day.